Lonely single mom drove a drunk black CEO home. Never expected he'd fall in love and make her his queen. The rain fell in relentless, slanting sheets, blurring the city lights into a watercolor of bleeding neons. From behind the wheel of her rattling 2008 sedan, Alara watched the drops race each other down the cracked windshield, each one a tiny symbol of her own frantic, downward spiral. The gas light had been on for the last 10 miles, a tiny, amber beacon of doom. Her phone, mounted on the dash, showed a dismal earnings total for a 12-hour shift, $63.14. Rent was due tomorrow. Her son, 6-year-old Leo, was asleep on a neighbor's couch, a kindness she could only repay with a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. A notification pinged, a last-ditch fare request from a high-end bar downtown, the kind of place she usually avoided. With a sigh that felt like it came from the very bottom of her soul, she accepted. A man stumbled out from under the bar's gleaming black awning, his silhouette sharp and tall against the hazy glow. He moved with a strange, conflicting grace, half drunk and half dignified. As he opened the back door and folded his large frame into her car, the scent of expensive whiskey and rain filled the small space. He said nothing, just leaned his head back against the worn fabric. "Where to?" Alara asked, her voice tired but gentle. He didn't open his eyes. "Just home. What could a woman with nothing? A single mother, one missed payment away from homelessness, possibly due for a man who smelled like he owned the world? And how could she know that this one simple act of decency was about to unravel the fabric of her life and stitch it back together into something beautiful and unrecognizable? She glanced in the rearview mirror. His face, illuminated by the passing streetlights, was striking. Strong jaw, smooth dark skin, and a deep crease between his brows that even sleep couldn't erase. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her car. He looked powerful, even passed out in the back of her sputtering sedan. "Sir? I need an address," she prodded softly. There was no response but the steady, rhythmic sound of his breathing. A flicker of panic went through her. What was she supposed to do? She couldn't leave him in her car, and she couldn't just drop him on a random corner. Driving around aimlessly would burn the last fumes in her gas tank. Taking a deep breath, she made a decision. She pulled over to a well-lit bus stop, killed the engine to save fuel, and turned to face him. "Sir?" she said, a little louder this time. "Nothing." Carefully, hoping he wouldn't wake up and misunderstand her intentions, she reached into the back seat. His suit jacket was draped beside him. She gently felt the pockets. In the inner breast pocket, her fingers found a hard leather rectangle. A wallet. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment of temptation. The wallet was thick, likely filled with cash and cards that could solve all her problems for a month, maybe more. But the thought was fleeting, dismissed as quickly as it came. That wasn't who she was. That wasn't the mother Leo deserved. She opened it, looking only for an ID. The driver's license read Julian Vance, with an address at the Blackwood Tower, the most exclusive residential building in the city. As she was about to close it, a faded photograph tucked behind a credit card caught her eye. It was of a smiling woman with kind eyes and a little girl on her lap, a mirror image of the woman but with a mischievous, gap-toothed grin. Family. A pang of unexpected empathy shot through her. This man, this stranger, had a story. He had a sorrow deep enough to drink himself into oblivion. Suddenly, he wasn't just a rich fare. He was a person, hurting. She started the car and drove. The Blackwood Tower loomed over the city like a monument of glass and steel. The doorman, a stern man in a crisp uniform, looked at her car with undisguised disdain until he saw the passenger in the back. His expression immediately shifted to one of professional concern. "Mr. Vance," he said, opening the door. Together, they managed to get Julian out of the car and into the opulent lobby. He was barely conscious, leaning heavily on the doorman. "Thank you, miss. I can take it from here," the doorman said dismissively. Alara hesitated. "Could you just make sure he gets a glass of water? And maybe some aspirin for the morning?" The doorman raised a skeptical eyebrow but nodded. Of course, back in her car, Alara looked at the fare on her phone. $42.50. She opened the wallet again, her hands steady this time. She carefully pulled out two $20 bills and a 5. She tucked the wallet back into his jacket pocket, which the doorman had placed on the seat, then drove away, leaving the $2.50 in change. She didn't feel righteous or proud. She just felt tired. She had enough for gas and a small box of Leo's favorite cereal. For tonight, that was enough. The next morning, Julian Vance awoke to a blinding headache and a profound sense of self-loathing. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The last thing he remembered was the third glass of Macallan 25 at the Gilded Cage, a toast to another ghost, another anniversary he wished he could forget. He sat up, groaning. On the nightstand beside his bed was a tall glass of water and 2 aspirin. He stared at them, confused. He lived alone. His cleaning service came on Wednesdays. It was Friday. A fragmented memory surfaced. A gentle voice, the smell of rain-soaked fabric, the rattling of an old car. He swung his legs out of bed and found his suit jacket slung over a chair. He checked the pockets. His phone, his keys, his wallet. Everything was there. He opened the wallet, a knot of dread in his stomach, expecting the worst. He thumbed through the cash. $400. Exactly what he'd had when he left the house. No, he recounted. 355. $45 was missing. His cynical mind immediately went to work. A thief with a conscience? Then he saw it. A small, crumpled receipt from the glove box of her car had somehow gotten stuck to the wallet. A gas receipt from 2 days prior. On the back, in neat, careful handwriting, was a simple calculation. Fare, $4,250. Paid, $4,500. Thank you. He stared at the note. He remembered the fare on the app. He remembered her quiet question, her concern. He remembered the water and aspirin. In his world of transactional relationships and calculated favors, this small, profound act of integrity was like a flare in the dark. It was illogical. It was decent. And it fascinated him. He spent the next hour feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. He was the CEO of Vance Industries, a multi-billion-dollar logistics empire. He had resources. He made a call to his head of security, a former federal agent named Marcus. I need you to find someone, a rideshare driver. Her name is Alara. I don't have a last name. She picked me up from the Gilded Cage last night around 2 a.m. Drives an old, silver sedan. Marcus was silent for a moment. Sir, that's not a lot to go on. Privacy policies are strict. I'm aware, Marcus. But you're good at what you do. Find her, Julian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. And be discreet. This is a personal matter. 2 days later, Marcus delivered. He'd had to pull a significant favor with a contact high up in the rideshare company's corporate office. But he had a name and an address. Alara Jensen. She lived in the Oakwood district, an area of the city known for its crumbling brick apartment buildings and perpetually failing storefronts. Julian looked at the address on the tablet, then at the view from his penthouse. He could almost see her neighborhood from his window, a blur of forgotten rooftops miles below. He changed out of his suit and into a simple pair of dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, clothing that was still more expensive than her monthly rent. He drove himself, his sleek black sports car feeling alien and obscene as he turned onto her street. The building was even more run down than he'd imagined. Graffiti covered one wall, and a window on the 3rd floor was boarded up with plywood. He found her apartment, 2B, and knocked. The door opened a crack, held by a tarnished security chain. Alara peered through the gap, her eyes widening in shock when she recognized him. Behind her, a small boy with big, curious eyes peeked out. Mr. Vance? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Ms. Jensen. Alara, Julian said, his voice softer than he'd intended. May I come in? She hesitated, then unlatched the chain and opened the door. The apartment was tiny, but it was immaculately clean. Books were stacked neatly on shelves made of cinder blocks and planks of wood. A child's colorful drawings were taped to the wall, a vibrant splash of life in the otherwise drab room. Leo, the little boy, hid behind his mother's legs, clutching her jeans. "I wanted to thank you," Julian began, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "For the other night, you showed a kindness and an integrity that are rare. This is for you." He held out the envelope. Contained $5,000 in cash. Enough for her rent, for food, for a moment to breathe. Alara stared at the envelope, then back at his face. She didn't move to take it. A quiet strength settled in her features. "No, thank you, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I took the fare I earned. I don't want anything else." Julian was taken aback. He had expected gratitude, perhaps some feigned reluctance, but not this outright, dignified refusal. "Please," he insisted. "You're obviously struggling. Let me help." Her eyes flashed with a hint of fire. "We're fine. We get by." She pulled Leo a little closer. A protective gesture that was as fierce as it was subtle. Julian realized he had made a mistake. He had treated her like a problem to be solved with money, just like he did with everything else. He was invalidating her pride, her very essence. He looked around the room again, his gaze landing on the bookshelf. He saw worn paperbacks of classic literature, but also textbooks on archival science and library information systems. "You studied this?" he asked, gesturing to the books. A flicker of her old self, the person she was before survival became her full-time job, returned to her eyes. "Yes, I have a master's degree from City University. But there aren't many jobs, and the ones that exist, they don't pay enough to cover childcare." An idea began to form in Julian's mind. A solution that wasn't just a handout, but an opportunity. It was also, he admitted to himself, a way to keep this intriguing woman in his orbit. "I have a proposition for you," he said, changing his approach entirely. "It's a job. My late wife was a writer and a historian. Her office, her library, all her research, it's been untouched for years. I need someone to organize it, to create an archive. Someone with a professional's eye. Someone I can trust." Alara stared at him, suspicion warring with a desperate spark of hope. "Why me?" "Because you returned a drunk man's wallet with the correct change," he said simply. "The pay would be substantial, and there's a small guest cottage on my property. It's furnished. You and your son could live there, rent-free, for as long as the project takes security. A real job using her degree. A safe home for Leo." It was everything she had been praying for. A lifeline thrown from the most unexpected of quarters. The cautious, pragmatic part of her brain screamed that it was too good to be true. But then she looked down at Leo, at his worn-out sneakers and the hopeful look in his big brown eyes. For him, she would risk it. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay, Mr. Vance. We'll take the job." The transition was like stepping into another dimension. One day, Alara and Leo were living in a cramped apartment where the sound of sirens was a constant lullaby. The next, they were moving into a charming stone cottage nestled in the corner of a vast, manicured estate. The main house, a modern masterpiece of glass and dark wood, loomed in the distance, beautiful and intimidating. Leo was ecstatic. He ran through the lush green grass, his laughter echoing in the quiet air. A sound so pure it made Alara's heart ache with joy. For the first few weeks, their lives ran on parallel tracks to Julian's. He would leave for his office before they woke up and return long after Leo was in bed. He was an absent, benevolent landlord. Alara, however, was immersed in his world, or rather, the world he had lost. The library was on the second floor of the main house, a breathtaking two-story room with shelves from floor to ceiling, all of it covered in a thin layer of dust. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking mess. Boxes of unsorted papers, stacks of research books with bookmarks still in them, a half-finished manuscript on a laptop that had long since lost its charge. It was the ghost of a vibrant life, and Alara felt like a respectful archaeologist excavating a forgotten tomb. She worked meticulously, her professional training kicking in. She created a system, cataloging books, sorting papers, carefully reading through journals to understand the scope of Amelia Vance's work. Through the pages, she began to know the woman in the photograph. Amelia was brilliant, passionate, and funny. Her love for Julian and their daughter, Lily, was a living thing on every page. Alara found pressed flowers in books, ticket stubs from concerts, silly notes Amelia had written to Julian tucked into research papers. She handled each item with a reverence that surprised her. Meanwhile, Leo was on his own mission, to make friends with the sad, tall man who lived in the big house. He was undeterred by Julian's reserved nature. He would leave his crayon drawings on the back doorstep for Mr. Vance, a lopsided son, a green stick figure family holding hands. Julian would find them in the mornings, a small, anonymous splash of color in his monochrome existence. He started keeping them, tucking them into a drawer in his sterile, minimalist kitchen. One Saturday afternoon, Julian was in the garden, staring blankly at a rose bush that hadn't bloomed in years, when Leo approached him, holding a bright red ball. "Do you want to play?" Leo asked, his voice full of childish optimism. Julian looked down at the boy. He saw a ghost of his own daughter's gap-toothed smile. The automatic, reflexive no died on his lips. I don't know how," Julian admitted, the words feeling foreign and true. Leo just tilted his head. "You just throw it. I'll catch it. It's easy for the next hour." They threw the red ball back and forth across the lawn. Alara watched from the cottage window, her hand pressed against the glass, tears welling in her eyes. It was the first time she had seen Julian truly smile. The ball, a simple child's toy, became a bridge across the vast, silent gulf between them. The quiet rhythm of their new life continued, but the invisible walls between the cottage and the main house began to dissolve. Julian started coming home earlier. He'd find excuses to walk through the garden when Leo was playing, or to get a glass of water from the kitchen when he knew Alara was working late in the library. They fell into a comfortable pattern of brief, polite conversations. "How is the project coming along? Leo seems to have taken a liking to your roses. Thank you for the drawing he left." The small talk was a fragile scaffold they were building around the cavernous space of their shared loneliness. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday night. Leo was asleep, and Alara was in the library, trying to piece together the timeline of Amelia's final research project. She found a small, leather-bound journal she hadn't seen before, tucked away in a box of photographs. She opened it. It was filled not with research notes, but with Amelia's handwriting, detailing her hopes and fears about her pregnancy with Lily. Alara was so engrossed she didn't hear Julian enter the room. "What did you find?" His voice startled her. She looked up, her face flushed. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't be reading this. It's personal." He walked closer, his eyes fixed on the journal in her hands. He didn't look angry. He just looked weary. "It's all right," he said, his voice raspy. "I haven't been able to touch any of this." He sank into the leather armchair opposite her desk. For a long time he was silent, just watching the rain streak down the massive windows. Alara waited, feeling the weight of his unspoken grief fill the room. "Today is their anniversary," he said finally, his voice low and heavy. "Not our wedding anniversary. The other one. The day I lost them." Alara's heart clenched. She closed the journal and gave him her full attention. "There was an accident," he continued, his gaze distant, seeing a memory she couldn't. "A drunk driver ran a red light. I was in a meeting in Tokyo. I got the call, and my world just ended. Amelia and Lily, they were on their way to the library to meet me. Lily was 5. She had just learned to write her name." He choked on the last word, a raw, ragged sound. "I've been living in this house, this museum, ever since. Every room is a memory. Every object is a ghost. The night you picked me up, that was Lily's birthday. I do it every year. I drink until I can't feel anything. But the next day, the feeling is always back, worse than before." Tears streamed down his face, silent and unheeded. He wasn't the powerful CEO anymore. He was just a man broken by grief. Alara didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts. She simply sat with him in his pain, her compassionate silence a sanctuary. She reached across the desk and gently placed her hand on his. It was a small, simple gesture, but in the vast emptiness of his life, it felt like an anchor. "You're not alone in this house anymore, Julian," she whispered. That night, something fundamental shifted. The employer-employee dynamic evaporated, replaced by a fragile, profound human connection. He had shown her his deepest wound, and she hadn't flinched or run away. She had simply stayed. In the weeks that followed, the house began to feel less like a museum and more like a home. The heavy, silent pall of grief started to lift, replaced by the sounds of life. The scent of Alara's baking simple cookies and muffins began to permeate the sterile air of the kitchen. Leo's laughter echoed in hallways that had been silent for years. Julian found himself drawn to them. He started joining Alara and Leo for dinner, first tentatively, then as a matter of course. They would eat in the sun-drenched breakfast nook, not the cavernous, formal dining room. The conversations were easy, revolving around Leo's day at the local school Alara had enrolled him in, or a particularly interesting discovery Alara had made in the archives. Julian found himself talking, too. He told them about his work, simplifying the complex world of global logistics into stories Leo could understand about big ships and trains carrying toys and bananas around the world. He was rediscovering parts of himself he thought had died with his family. His sense of humor, his ability to play, his capacity for simple joy. He and Leo developed their own rituals, checking the dormant rose bushes for new buds, building elaborate Lego castles on the living room floor. Julian saw how Alara watched them, a soft, warm expression on her face that made his chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with grief. He was falling in love. The realization didn't hit him like a lightning bolt. It seeped into him slowly, like warmth from a fire. It was in the way she'd bite her lip when she was concentrating on a difficult passage in Amelia's notes. It was in the fierce, protective love she had for her son. It was in the quiet strength that had allowed her to face poverty with dignity and his grief with compassion. He was falling for her goodness, for the light she carried within her that had somehow managed to pierce his darkness. Alara felt it too. She saw past the CEO and the grieving widower to the man underneath. A man who was kind, surprisingly funny, and deeply lonely. She saw the way his eyes softened when he looked at Leo, the genuine affection and care he showed her son. She found herself looking forward to the sound of his car in the driveway, her heart giving a little flutter that both thrilled and terrified her. One evening, after Leo was asleep, they were sitting in the living room, a comfortable silence between them. Alara was curled up on the sofa with a book, and Julian was staring into the fireplace. "You've brought this house back to life, Alara," he said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. "You and Leo," she looked up, her heart pounding. "We're just here." "No," he said, turning to look at her, his dark eyes intense. "You're more than just here. You've filled this place with hope." He stood up and walked over to the sofa, sitting down beside her. He tentatively reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm and steady. "I haven't felt hope in a very long time." In that moment, the unspoken thing between them became real. The air crackled with it. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She met him halfway, and their lips touched. The kiss wasn't fiery or desperate. It was gentle, questioning, and full of a quiet, profound gratitude. It was the closing of one painful chapter and the hesitant, hopeful beginning of another. Their idyllic world, so carefully constructed from kindness and shared vulnerability, was about to be shattered. The harbinger of this change arrived in a cloud of expensive perfume and condescension, driving a vintage silver Bentley. Eleanor Vance, Julian's mother, had arrived for her annual, unannounced inspection of her son's life. She was a formidable woman, with perfectly coiffed silver hair, a spine of steel, and eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. She was the matriarch of the Vance dynasty, a woman who valued lineage, reputation, and power above all else. She swept into the house, her critical gaze taking in the sight of Leo's sneakers by the door and a brightly colored drawing of a dinosaur taped to the refrigerator. "Julian, darling," she said, her voice like chilled champagne. The place looks lived in. Her eyes landed on Alara, who was standing nervously in the kitchen doorway. Eleanor's polite smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked Alara up and down, her gaze a swift and brutal appraisal that took in her simple dress and lack of expensive jewelry. "And you must be the archivist," she said, the word dripping with skepticism. Julian stepped forward, placing a protective hand on the small of Alara's back. "Mother, this is Alara Jensen, and her son, Leo. They're living in the cottage." Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. How convenient. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Eleanor was never overtly rude, but her every word was a carefully aimed barb. She would ask Alara about her background, in a tone that suggested she was inquiring about a new species of insect. She'd lament how standards had fallen when she saw Leo eating a peanut butter sandwich in the kitchen. She made it clear, in 1,000 subtle ways, that she saw Alara as a gold-digging opportunist, a low-class interloper who had taken advantage of her son's grief. "He's vulnerable, you must understand," Eleanor said to Alara one afternoon, cornering her in the library. "A man in his position, with his wealth, he attracts people. You seem like a clever girl. You know what I mean." Alara tried to hold her ground. "Your son has been very kind to me. I'm just doing my job." "Oh, I'm sure you are," Eleanor purred, her smile as sharp as a shard of glass. "I'm just concerned that you might be confusing his kindness for something more. It would be a terrible misunderstanding." For everyone involved, Julian was not blind to his mother's machinations. He confronted her, telling her to leave Alara alone, but Eleanor was an expert at feigning innocence. "Darling, I'm only thinking of you. After what you went through with Amelia, I can't bear to see you make a mistake you'll regret." The tension in the house became a palpable thing. The easy laughter and comfortable silences were replaced by a strained politeness. Alara felt like she was constantly being watched and judged. She started to retreat, to make herself smaller, to avoid being in the main house whenever Eleanor was there. She saw the doubt creeping into her own mind. Was Eleanor right? Was she just a foolish girl getting swept up in a fairy tale that could never be hers? The climax arrived, as it often did in the Vance family, at a public event. The annual Vance Foundation Charity Gala was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, a night where immense wealth and performative philanthropy went hand in hand. Julian, in a move of open defiance against his mother, insisted that Alara attend as his date. He bought her a stunning, deep blue gown that matched her eyes, and a simple diamond necklace. When she came down the stairs, he looked at her as if he were seeing the sun for the first time. For a moment, standing in the grand foyer, she felt like a princess. But the feeling evaporated the moment they stepped into the glittering ballroom. Hundreds of eyes turned to them, and Alara could feel the whispers ripple through the crowd. Who was the woman on Julian Vance's arm? At their table, Eleanor was icily polite, introducing Alara as Julian's associate throughout the dinner. Alara felt small and out of place, a field mouse at a gathering of sleek, predatory cats. Later in the evening, while Julian was pulled away by a board member, Eleanor made her move. She found Alara by the terrace, looking out at the city lights. "It's a beautiful view, isn't it?" Eleanor began, her voice deceptively soft. "A world of possibilities. A world you don't belong in." Alara turned to face her. "I don't know what you want from me." Eleanor's facade of civility dropped completely. Her eyes turned to chips of ice. "I want you to disappear. My son is a good man, but his grief has made him a fool. He thinks he's in love with his little charity project. But this infatuation will pass, and when it does, you will be a liability." An embarrassment from her small, diamond-encrusted purse, Eleanor produced a checkbook and a pen. "I've done my research, Ms. Jensen. I know about your eviction notices, your debt. I know Leo's father is not in the picture. I know how precarious your life is." She scribbled a figure on the check and tore it out, holding it out to Alara. "It was for $1 million. Take this. Consider it a generous severance package. You'll take your son and you will leave the city. You will never contact Julian again." Alara stared at the check, horrified. I don't want your money. Eleanor's lips curled into a cruel sneer. Oh, I think you do. Because if you don't take this money and leave, I will use every resource at my disposal to prove you are an unfit mother. I will dig up every hardship, every struggle, and I will paint you as a desperate, unstable woman who is a danger to her own child. I will take your son from you, Elara. I promise you that. The threat landed like a physical blow, stealing the air from Elara's lungs. This was her deepest, most primal fear. She could endure poverty, loneliness, and condescension. But the thought of losing Leo, it was unthinkable. She looked at the cold, determined face of the woman in front of her and knew, with a sickening certainty, that Eleanor would do it. Defeated and terrified, Elara fled. She slipped out of the gala, hailed a taxi, and returned to the estate, her beautiful gown feeling like a costume for a part she was never meant to play. Eleanor's threat echoed in her mind. I will take your son from you. The fairy tale had turned into a nightmare. There was no choice. To protect Leo, she had to disappear. Her hands shaking, she wrote a short, heartbreaking note for Julian. Thank you for everything. I'm sorry. Please don't look for us. She packed a small bag with their most essential belongings, woke a confused Leo, and whispered that they were going on an adventure. She called a taxi to take them to the downtown bus station, the gateway back to the anonymous, precarious life she had so briefly escaped. When Julian returned to the table and found Elara gone, a cold dread washed over him. He found his mother, who was sipping champagne with a triumphant glint in her eye. Where is she? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. She's gone, darling, Eleanor said smoothly. She came to her senses. I helped her see that she was in over her head. I even gave her a little something to help her start over. Julian's blood ran cold. He knew his mother. He knew what she was capable of. What did you do? He snarled. For the first time, Eleanor looked taken aback by the raw fury in his eyes. I did what was necessary to protect this family. She is my family. Julian roared, the sound cutting through the polite chatter around them. You and your obsession with appearances, with control. You just drove away the best thing that has ever happened to me. We're done, mother. You are no longer welcome in my home or in my life. He turned and strode out of the ballroom, leaving a stunned and silenced crowd in his wake. He raced home, his heart pounding with a terror he hadn't felt since the day he'd lost Amelia and Lily. He found the note on the kitchen counter. The words were a knife in his gut, but he refused to accept it. He would not lose love again. He knew where she would go. A bus station. A place to become anonymous. He jumped in his car and drove, breaking every speed limit, his mind racing. He found her standing under the sickly yellow light of the bus terminal, holding Leo's hand. Leo was crying softly, and Elara's face was a mask of despair. She looked up and saw him, and her eyes widened in disbelief. He strode towards her, his expression a mixture of desperation and fierce determination. Don't, he said, his voice ragged. Please, don't do this. I have to, she sobbed, tears finally breaking free. She'll take him, Julian. She'll take my son. No, she won't, he said, taking her face in his hands. She has no power over us. I will never let anyone hurt you or Leo. Ever. Do you hear me? He looked from her tear-streaked face to the frightened little boy beside her. In that grimy, desolate bus station, surrounded by strangers, everything became clear. My mother thinks love is a liability, he said, his voice ringing with conviction. But she's wrong. It's the only thing that matters. Elara Jensen, you are the strongest, kindest, most decent person I have ever known. You walked into the ruins of my life and you built a home. I love you. I love Leo. I don't want to be just your employer or your landlord. I want to be your husband. I want to be Leo's father. Then he did something that silenced the entire bus station. Julian Vance, the billionaire CEO, got down on one knee on the dirty linoleum floor. He had no ring, nothing but the desperate, unwavering love in his eyes. Marry me, Elara. Marry me, and let me spend the rest of my life protecting our family. 1 year later, The penthouse at the top of the Blackwood Tower was unrecognizable. The minimalist, grief-stricken silence was gone, replaced by the vibrant, happy chaos of family life. Leo's colorful drawings were no longer tucked away in a drawer. They were framed and hung on the walls alongside priceless works of art. The scent of freshly baked bread often mingled with the faint, pleasant aroma of Julian's cologne. The ghosts had been gently ushered out, replaced by laughter. Alara stood on the terrace, looking out at the city lights, no longer intimidated but filled with a sense of peace. She was not just Mrs. Vance. Julian had encouraged her to put her skills to use on a grander scale. She was now the director of the Vance Foundation's New Literacy Initiative, a program she had designed from the ground up to bring books and educational resources to underprivileged children across the city. She had found her purpose, not as an accessory to Julian's life, but as a partner in building a better world. Julian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He was a changed man. The deep crease of sorrow between his brows was gone, replaced by laugh lines around his eyes. He still worked hard, but he was home for dinner every single night. He had discovered that being a father was a far greater legacy than any business deal. The adoption had been finalized 6 months ago. Leo was legally his son. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, kissing her temple. "I was just thinking about a rainy night," she said, leaning back against him. "About a drunk man in the back of my car," he chuckled. A warm, easy sound. "I was thinking about the bravest woman I've ever met. The woman who saw a man at his worst and chose to be kind inside." The light in Leo's room clicked on. It was time for their favorite ritual. They walked into his room together and snuggled on either side of him in his bed. He handed them a well-worn copy of his favorite picture book. "You read the knight's part," Leo instructed Julian. "And Mommy, you're the dragon," as Julian's deep voice filled the room with tales of adventure and Alara made playful roaring sounds. She looked at the 2 boys in her life, the little one who was her heart, and the big one who had healed it. They were a family, forged not from blood or circumstance, but from a simple choice to be decent in a world that was often anything but. For in the quiet architecture of kindness, they had built a home where every heart was safe. We hope you enjoyed this heartwarming tale of love and redemption. Stories like these remind us that a single act of kindness can change a life, and that true wealth is found not in our possessions, but in the love we give. If this story stirred your soul, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspirational stories that will warm your heart.